The sound of hooves disturbing the dust outside her window brought Beatrice Nash fully awake in an instant, her hand already reaching for the rifle beside her bed in the darkness of that spring night in 1876. She had learned to sleep lightly since arriving in Park City, Utah Territory 3 months ago. A young woman alone trying to make a life for herself after her father's death had left her with nothing but debts back in Missouri. The only thing of value she owned was the magnificent chestnut mare her father had given her on her 18th birthday 2 years ago, and she would die before she let anyone take Copper from her. The moon hung low over the Washer Mountains, casting just enough silvery light through her bedroom window that she could make out the shadow of a man moving near the small barn behind her modest cabin. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she crept to the window, pressing herself against the wall as she peered out into the night. The figure was lean and moved with practiced stealth, leading her horse quietly toward the road that wound down from her property into the valley below. Beatrice grabbed her shawl and threw it over her nightgown, not bothering with proper clothes as rage flooded through her veins. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to lose everything now. The rifle felt cold and solid in her hands as she slipped out the back door, her bare feet making no sound on the packed earth of her yard. The thief had his back to her, one hand on Copper's bridle, whispering soothing words to keep the mare calm. She raised the rifle, her finger finding the trigger as she called out into the darkness. "Let go of my horse, or I will shoot you where you stand." The man froze, his hands slowly rising from the bridle. In the moonlight, she could see he was young, probably not much older than she was, with a scraggly beard and clothes that had seen better days. A drifter, most likely, passing through and thinking he could make off with whatever he could grab. Park City had no shortage of such men, drawn by rumors of silver in the mountains and leaving with empty pockets and desperate hearts. "Now hold on there, miss," the drifter said, his voice carrying a false note of friendliness. "I was just admiring your fine animal here. Did not mean any harm." "You were stealing my horse," Beatrice said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I am not a fool, and I am not afraid to use this rifle." The drifter's eyes darted toward the road, calculating his chances. Beatrice saw the shift in his posture a moment before he moved, lunging for Copper's bridle again with the clear intention of swinging himself onto the mare's back and riding off before she could react. Her finger tightened on the trigger, but before she could fire, another figure emerged from the darkness beyond her barn, moving with a speed that seemed impossible for someone so large. The newcomer was massive, easily over 6 feet tall with shoulders that seemed to span half the width of her barn door. Long dark hair fell past his shoulders, and even in the dim moonlight, she could see the powerful muscles of his arms as he grabbed the drifter by the collar and yanked him away from her horse with no more effort than if he were handling a child. The drifter let out a startled yelp, his feet leaving the ground for a moment before the big man slammed him against the side of the barn. "The lady said to let go of her horse," the stranger said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate in Beatrice's chest, even from several feet away. "Where I come from, a man who steals from a woman alone deserves worse than he is about to get." The drifter struggled, but it was like watching a rabbit try to fight free from a bear trap. The big man held him pinned with one hand while he looked over his shoulder at Beatrice, and in that moment, she caught her first clear glimpse of his face. He had strong, rugged features, a square jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes that even in the darkness seemed to assess everything about her in a single glance. There was something wild about him, untamed, like the mountains themselves had shaped him from stone and timber. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, His tone softening slightly as he addressed her, Beatrice lowered the rifle, suddenly aware that she was standing in her nightgown and shawl in front of two strange men. Her cheeks burned, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. "I am fine. Thank you for your assistance, though I had the situation under control." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost forming a smile. "I am sure you did, but it seemed a shame to let you waste good ammunition on trash like this." He gave the drifter a shake for emphasis. "What do you want me to do with him?" The drifter's eyes were wide with fear now, all his false bravado gone. "Please, I was not going to hurt nobody. I just needed a horse to get to Salt Lake City. There is work there, they say, and I ain't eaten properly in days." "So you thought you would steal from a woman alone?" the big man said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "You are either a coward or a fool, probably both." "Please," the drifter whimpered. Beatrice studied the thief for a long moment. She could see the truth in his eyes, the desperation that had driven him to such a foolish act. She had known desperation herself, had felt it gnawing at her bones during the long journey west after her father's funeral. But she had never stolen, never taken from others to ease her own suffering. Still, there was something pitiful about the man, something that made her think of a stray dog more than a hardened criminal. "Let him go," she said finally. The big man turned to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Miss, if I let him go, there is nothing stopping him from coming back the moment I leave." "He will not come back," Beatrice said, meeting the drifter's eyes. "Because if he does, I will not hesitate to shoot him, and I am an excellent shot. My father made sure of that before he died." "Is that understood?" The drifter nodded frantically. "Yes, miss, I swear it. I will never set foot on your property again." The big man looked between them for a moment longer, then released his grip. The drifter stumbled forward, caught himself, and then took off running down the road without a backward glance. They watched until he disappeared into the darkness, the sound of his footsteps fading into the night. "That was merciful of you," the big man said, turning back to face her. "Maybe too merciful." "Maybe," Beatrice agreed, "but I would rather show mercy and be wrong than show cruelty and regret it." She paused, suddenly aware again of her state of undress. "I should thank you properly for your help, Mr. Foster," he said. "Ethan Foster. Though most folks just call me the Mountain Man on account of I live up in the high country most of the year." "Beatrice Nash," she replied. "I own this property, small as it is." Ethan Foster looked around at her cabin and barn, taking in the neat garden plot beside the house and the well-maintained fence that surrounded her small pasture. "You do fine work for a woman alone. How long have you been here?" "3 months," Beatrice said. "I came from Missouri after my father passed. There was nothing left for me there but debt and bad memories." She did not know why she was telling this stranger such personal information, but something about him made her feel safe despite his intimidating size. "Missouri is a long way from Utah Territory," Ethan said. "That took courage." "It took desperation," Beatrice corrected. "Though I suppose the two often go hand in hand." She gestured toward her cabin. "Would you like to come inside? I could make coffee, and I would like to thank you properly for your help." Ethan glanced at the sky, judging the hour by the position of the moon. "It is late, miss. I should not impose." "You just saved my horse and possibly my life," Beatrice said. "The least I can do is offer you coffee and perhaps some bread. I baked yesterday." He hesitated for another moment, then nodded. "I would appreciate that, Miss Nash. Thank you." Beatrice led him inside, acutely aware of his presence filling her small cabin. He had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe, and when he stood in her main room he seemed to take up all the available space. She lit the lamp on her table, casting warm yellow light across the simple furnishings she had managed to acquire since arriving in Park City. Everything was secondhand, bought with the small amount of money she had earned doing laundry and sewing for the miners who flooded into town every week. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to one of her 2 chairs. "I will just be a moment." She disappeared into her bedroom and quickly changed into a proper dress, her fingers fumbling with the buttons in her haste. When she emerged, Ethan was standing by her window, looking out at the mountains rising black against the starlit sky. He turned when he heard her, and she saw his eyes take in her appearance with an appreciation he did not try to hide. "Better?" she asked, feeling self-conscious. "Different," he said. "Though I will admit the nightgown was memorable." Beatrice felt her cheeks flame. "You are very forward, Mr. Foster." "I live alone in the mountains, Miss Nash. I forget sometimes how to talk to civilized folk." But there was a warmth in his eyes that softened the words. "I apologize if I offended you." "You did not," she said, surprised to find it was true. She moved to her stove and began preparing coffee, grateful for something to do with her hands. "What brings you down from the mountains at this hour? It must be nearly midnight." "Closer to 1 in the morning," Ethan said, settling into the chair she had offered. It creaked under his weight, but held. "I was coming back from selling furs in Salt Lake City. I camp about a mile up the road when I pass through this area. I heard your horse making noise and came to investigate. Found that drifter trying to steal her." "You heard copper from a mile away?" Beatrice asked, doubting. "Sound carries strange in the mountains at night," Ethan said. "And I have learned to pay attention to things that seem out of place. A horse calling out when it should be sleeping usually means trouble." Beatrice brought the coffee to the table along with a plate of bread and the small amount of butter she had. Ethan accepted the cup with hands that were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who worked hard for everything he had. She found herself studying him in the lamplight, taking in details she had missed in the darkness outside. He was perhaps 30 years old, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he spent most of his time squinting against bright sun and mountain glare. His clothes were well made but worn, leather and wool that could withstand harsh weather. Everything about him spoke of strength and self-reliance. "How long have you been living in the mountains?" she asked, sitting across from him. "Most of my life," Ethan said, taking a long drink of the hot coffee. "My father was a trapper. He brought me west when I was just a boy. After he died, I stayed. The mountains are the only home I know. Do you ever get lonely?" The question was out before Beatrice could stop herself, too personal for a first meeting. But Ethan did not seem offended. He considered it while he chewed a piece of bread, his eyes distant. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I have never felt comfortable in towns or cities. Too many people, too much noise. The mountains are quiet, they do not ask questions or make demands. They also do not provide companionship," Beatrice said softly. Ethan met her eyes across the table. "No, they do not, but that is a choice I made a long time ago." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking coffee and eating bread. Beatrice found herself relaxing in his presence, the fear and adrenaline from the attempted theft slowly draining away. There was something solid about Ethan Foster, something that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her father's death. "Tell me about your father," Ethan said eventually. "You said you came west after he died." Beatrice wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, using its warmth to chase away the chill that always came when she thought about her father. "He was a good man, a farmer in Missouri. He raised me alone after my mother died giving birth to my brother. My brother did not survive either." She paused, old grief rising in her throat. "It was just the 2 of us for as long as I can remember. He taught me everything he knew, how to shoot, how to ride, how to work the land. He wanted me to be able to take care of myself. Sounds like he succeeded, Ethan said. He did, Beatrice agreed. But then he got sick 2 winters ago, some kind of lung disease. He lingered for months, getting weaker every day. By the time he died, we had sold everything we had to pay the doctor bills. The farm was mortgaged to the bank. There was nothing left. So you came west. So I came west, Beatrice repeated. I heard there was land available in Utah Territory, that the government was giving parcels to settlers willing to work them. I sold the last few things I had, bought copper because I knew I would need a good horse, and started riding. It took me 2 months to get here. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her with new respect. 2 months alone on the trail, that took more than courage, Miss Nash. I had no choice, Beatrice said simply. Stay in Missouri and starve, or come west and try to build something new. The decision was easy. And now you are here, on this piece of land, trying to make a life for yourself. Trying, Beatrice agreed. Some days are better than others. The soil is good, and I have managed to grow enough vegetables to sell in town. I do laundry and sewing for extra money. It is not much, but it is mine. Ethan nodded slowly. That means something, owning your own place, being beholden to no one. You understand that, Beatrice said. It was not a question. I do. They talked through the rest of the night, the conversation flowing easily between them. Ethan told her about life in the mountains, about tracking animals through snow and setting trap lines in frozen streams. He described the way the high peaks looked at dawn, painted pink and gold by the rising sun, and how the wind sounded when it howled through narrow canyons. Beatrice listened, fascinated by this world she had never known, so different from the flat farmland of Missouri or the bustling mining town of Park City. In turn, she told him about her childhood, about learning to read from her father's few precious books, about the excitement of the county fair every summer, and the simple joy of watching things grow from seeds she had planted with her own hands. She talked about her dreams for her property, the plans she had to expand her garden and maybe get a few chickens, perhaps even a milk cow if she could save enough money. The sky was beginning to lighten outside her window when Ethan finally rose to leave. I should let you get some rest, Miss Nash. You have had an eventful night. Beatrice stood as well, surprised to realize how quickly the hours had passed. Thank you again for your help, Mr. Foster. I do not know what would have happened if you had not been there. You would have shot that drifter and dealt with the consequences, Ethan said, his tone matter of fact. You are stronger than you think you are. Perhaps, Beatrice said, walking him to the door. Will you be passing this way again? Ethan paused in the doorway, his large frame silhouetted against the growing dawn. I come through Park City every few weeks to trade furs. I suppose I could stop by, make sure you are doing all right, if that would be acceptable to you. I would like that, Beatrice said, and was surprised by how much she meant it. I would like that very much. He nodded, then surprised her by reaching out and gently squeezing her hand. His palm was rough and warm, completely engulfing her smaller hand. Take care of yourself, Beatrice Nash. And keep that rifle close. Then he was gone, walking out into the breaking dawn with long, easy strides. Beatrice stood in her doorway and watched until he disappeared around the bend in the road, heading back up into the mountains that were his home. She felt oddly bereft at his departure, as if something important had just walked out of her life. She spent the rest of that day in a strange mood, going through her usual chores while her mind kept drifting back to the night before. She checked on Copper repeatedly, reassuring herself that her mare was safe and unharmed. The horse seemed completely unbothered by the attempted theft, more interested in the fresh hay Beatrice provided than in any lingering fear. The next few weeks passed in their usual rhythm. Beatrice tended her garden, took in laundry and sewing from the miners in town, and carefully saved every penny she earned. Park City was growing rapidly thanks to the silver strikes in the surrounding mountains, and there was no shortage of single men who needed their clothes cleaned and mended. Beatrice had learned to be polite but distant with them, never encouraging the attention some of them tried to give her. She had no interest in becoming some miner's wife, giving up her hard-won independence to keep house for a man who might disappear at any moment chasing rumors of the next big strike. But she found herself thinking about Ethan Foster at odd moments throughout her days. She would remember the way he had lifted that drifter with one hand, the quiet confidence in his voice, the genuine interest in his eyes as he listened to her talk about her dreams and plans. She caught herself looking up the road toward the mountains more than once, wondering when he might pass through again, if he would remember his promise to check on her. It was nearly 3 weeks after the attempted theft when she heard the sound of hooves approaching her cabin one evening. She looked up from the beans she was shelling to see a familiar large figure riding down from the high country on a sturdy bay horse. Her heart did an unexpected flip in her chest, and she had to force herself to remain calm as Ethan Foster dismounted in her yard. "Miss Nash," he called out, removing his wide-brimmed hat. "I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all, Mr. Foster," Beatrice said, standing and brushing off her apron. "I am pleased to see you again." He tied his horse near her barn, then walked over to where she stood on her small porch. In the golden light of late afternoon, he looked even more impressive than she remembered, all broad shoulders and lean strength. He had trimmed his beard since she last saw him, and his long hair was tied back with a leather cord. "I was passing through on my way to Salt Lake City," Ethan said. "Thought I would stop and make sure everything was all right here. No more trouble with drifters." "None," Beatrice assured him. "Everything has been quiet." "Good." He looked around at her property, taking in the progress she had made since his last visit. Her garden was flourishing, neat rows of vegetables showing the results of her careful tending. "Your place is looking well. You have been working hard." "It is the only way to survive out here," Beatrice said. "Would you like some water?" "I was about to make supper, and you are welcome to join me if you have time." "I have time," Ethan said, and the warmth in his eyes made her pulse quicken. "And I would be grateful for a home-cooked meal. It has been nothing but dried meat and hardtack for me these past weeks." Beatrice led him inside, suddenly self-conscious about her modest cabin and simple furnishings. But Ethan did not seem to notice or care about the poverty of her surroundings. He settled into the same chair he had occupied during his last visit, looking comfortable and at ease as she moved around her small kitchen preparing their meal. She had been planning a simple supper of beans and cornbread, but found herself wanting to make something better for her guest. She added some of the salt pork she had been saving, sliced fresh tomatoes from her garden, and even broke out a small amount of precious sugar to make a simple cake. As she worked, they talked, falling back into the easy conversation that had marked their first meeting. "How has the trapping been?" she asked, stirring the pot of beans. "Good enough," Ethan said. "The mountain streams are still running cold with snowmelt, which makes the beaver pelts thicker. I should get a decent price in Salt Lake City." "Is it dangerous work trapping in the mountains?" Ethan shrugged. "It can be. There are bears to watch out for and mountain lions. The weather can turn on you quick at high altitude, but I know the land and I am careful. Still, it must be hard doing everything alone." "It has its challenges," Ethan admitted. "But I prefer it to depending on others or having them depend on me." Beatrice glanced at him as she checked the cornbread in her oven. "Why is that, if you do not mind my asking?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "My father died because he depended on others." We were on a trapping expedition with 3 other men, deep in the Uintas. My father got injured, broke his leg bad. The other men did not want to slow down, did not want to risk missing the best trapping season. They left us, took most of the supplies with them. My father died 3 days later from infection and cold. I was 16 years old. Beatrice set down her spoon and turned to look at him, her heart aching for the boy he had been. "Oh, Ethan, I am so sorry." "It was a long time ago," he said, but she could hear the old pain beneath his words. "But I learned something from it. The only person you can truly depend on is yourself. Everyone else will leave you when things get hard." "Not everyone," Beatrice said softly. "Some people stay. Some people are worth trusting." "Maybe," Ethan said, meeting her eyes. "I have not found many of them." They ate supper as the sun set outside her window, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The meal was simple but good, and Ethan ate with the appreciation of a man who knew what it was like to go hungry. Beatrice found herself watching him, noticing little things. The way his hands, so large and capable, handled her delicate fork with surprising grace. The lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled, which he did more often as the evening wore on. The way he listened when she spoke, really listened as if her words mattered. After supper, Ethan helped her clean up despite her protests that he was a guest. They worked side by side in her small kitchen, and Beatrice was acutely aware of every time their hands brushed or their shoulders touched in the confined space. There was something developing between them, something she had not expected and did not quite know how to name. When the dishes were done, Ethan reluctantly prepared to leave. "I should make camp before it gets full dark," he said, though he made no move toward the door. "Thank you for the meal, Beatrice. It was the best food I have had in months." "You are welcome anytime," Beatrice said, and then, before she could lose her courage, added, "I have enjoyed your company, Ethan. These past weeks have been lonely. It is nice to have someone to talk to." Something shifted in his expression, a softening that made him look younger despite his rugged features. "I have enjoyed your company too, more than I expected to, if I am being honest." "Then come back," Beatrice said simply, "whenever you are passing through. I will always have a meal for you and conversation if you want it." Ethan reached out and took her hand, the same gesture he had made during his first visit, but this time he held it longer, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "I will come back," he promised. "That you can count on." And he did. Over the following months, Ethan Foster became a regular presence in Beatrice Nash's life. He would appear every 2 or 3 weeks, always when he was traveling between his mountain home and Salt Lake City to trade his furs. Sometimes he would arrive in the evening and share a meal with her before camping nearby. Other times, he would show up during the day and help her with tasks around her property, his immense strength making quick work of projects that would have taken her days to complete alone. He fixed the sagging roof on her barn, replaced broken fence posts, even helped her dig a new root cellar to store vegetables for the coming winter. In return, Beatrice fed him, mended his clothes, and provided the kind of companionship he had not known in years. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts and dreams for their futures. Slowly, carefully, they learned each other's rhythms and habits, the way 2 people do when they are beginning to fit themselves into each other's lives. Summer deepened into August, and Park City sweltered under the hot Utah sun. Beatrice's garden produced abundantly, and she sold the surplus in town, her small savings growing steadily. She began to dream of expanding her property, maybe buying the adjacent parcel of land that was coming up for sale. With more acreage, she could support more livestock, perhaps even hire help. She could build something lasting, something that would be hers long after she was gone. She mentioned these dreams to Ethan one evening as they sat on her porch watching the stars come out. He had arrived earlier that day with a string of rabbits he had caught, and they had spent a pleasant afternoon preparing them for smoking. Now, with the work done and the evening cool around them, they sat in comfortable silence broken occasionally by quiet conversation. "You think big," Ethan said when she finished describing her plans. "I admire that about you." "Is it foolish?" Beatrice asked. "A woman alone trying to build something this substantial?" "No," Ethan said firmly. "It is not foolish at all. You have already proven you can do it, but it will be hard work." "I am not afraid of hard work." "I know you are not." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "What if you were not alone?" "Would that make it easier?" Beatrice's heart skipped a beat. She turned to look at him, trying to read his expression in the starlight. "What do you mean?" Ethan shifted in his chair, and for the first time since she had known him, he seemed uncertain, almost nervous. "I mean that I find myself thinking about you when I am up in the mountains, wondering what you are doing, if you are safe, if you are happy. I find myself hurrying through my work, so I have an excuse to come back down here sooner." He paused, then added, "I find myself imagining what it would be like to stay instead of always leaving." Beatrice's throat felt tight. "Ethan." "I know it is too soon," he said quickly. "I know we have only known each other a few months, but I am not a young man anymore, Beatrice. I am 32 years old, and I have spent most of my life alone. I thought that was what I wanted, what I needed. But then I met you, and everything changed." "It changed for me too," Beatrice whispered. "From that very first night when you came out of the darkness to help me. I have never felt this way about anyone before." Ethan reached over and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I love you, Beatrice Nash. I think I have loved you since I saw you standing there in your nightgown with that rifle, too stubborn and brave to back down, even though you were terrified. I know I have nothing much to offer you, just myself and whatever I can build with these two hands. But if you will have me, I would like to stay. I would like to help you build your dream and maybe build one of our own together." Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too, Ethan Foster. I have been so lonely, and then you came into my life and everything got brighter. Yes, I will have you. Yes, I want you to stay." He pulled her to her feet and into his arms, and when he kissed her it felt like coming home. His arms wrapped around her, strong and sure, making her feel safe and cherished in a way she had not felt since her father died. She kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside for months, all the longing and hope and love she had been afraid to name. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, his hands cupping her face with surprising gentleness. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, but I am sure about this. I am sure about you." "Yes," Beatrice said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 3 weeks later in Park City, in a simple ceremony performed by the circuit judge who passed through town once a month. Beatrice wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric she bought with her savings, pale blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Ethan wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed and his beard shaped, looking simultaneously uncomfortable in civilized attire and devastatingly handsome. The ceremony was attended by a few of Beatrice's customers from town, women she had befriended during her months of taking in laundry and sewing. They brought food for a small celebration afterward, simple dishes that nevertheless made Beatrice feel connected to a community in a way she had not felt since leaving Missouri. Ethan stood beside her throughout, his hand never far from hers, his presence solid and reassuring. When they returned to the cabin that evening as husband and wife, Ethan swept her up in his arms and carried her over the threshold, making her laugh with delight. He set her down gently in their small main room, then pulled her close for a kiss that quickly deepened into something more passionate. "Are you sure about this?" Beatrice asked when they broke apart, suddenly shy. "About leaving the mountains and settling here with me. I am sure about you," Ethan said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The mountains will still be there. But you, Beatrice, you are here, and this is where I want to be." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a joining of two lonely souls who had found each other against all odds. Ethan was gentle with her, mindful of her innocence, taking his time to show her the pleasures that could exist between a man and a woman who loved each other. Beatrice gave herself to him completely, trusting him with her body and her heart in a way she had never trusted anyone. Afterward, they lay tangled together in her small bed, talking quietly in the darkness. Ethan's arms were wrapped around her, and Beatrice had never felt so safe, so completely at peace. The future stretched before them, unknown and full of possibility, but for the first time since her father's death, she was not facing it alone. The next morning, Ethan made the journey up into the mountains to his cabin, returning 3 days later with everything he owned loaded on his pack horse. It was not much, just his trapping equipment, some clothes, a few treasured possessions from his father. But it represented the entirety of his old life, and he was bringing it down from the high country to merge with hers in the valley. Together, they began to build their life. Ethan continued trapping during the season, but now he came home to Beatrice every few weeks instead of staying alone in the mountains for months at a time. His furs brought in good money, which they combined with the income from Beatrice's garden and sewing. They worked side by side on the property, expanding the barn, building a proper chicken coop, clearing more land for cultivation. By the time winter settled over Park City, they had saved enough to buy the adjacent parcel of land Beatrice had been eyeing. 20 more acres that doubled the size of their holdings and their possibilities. Ethan drew up plans for a larger house, something they could grow into, with multiple bedrooms for the children they both hoped would come. The winter was harsh, with heavy snows that turned the world white and still. But inside their cabin, there was warmth and love. Beatrice learned to cook the wild game Ethan brought home from his winter trap lines. Ethan learned to appreciate the simple domesticity of a home shared with someone he loved. They read together by the fire in the evenings, Beatrice sharing her precious books with this man who had spent so much of his life isolated from education and culture. Spring came with a rush of meltwater and greening hills, and with it, the realization that Beatrice was pregnant. She told Ethan one evening in late April, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment he simply stared at her, and then a smile broke across his rugged features like the sun emerging from clouds. "A baby," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Ethan said, pulling her into his arms. "Terrified, maybe, but happy, yes, so very happy." He became even more protective of her as her pregnancy progressed, often refusing to let her do heavy work around the property. Beatrice protested at first, insisting she was not an invalid, but secretly she loved his attentiveness, the way he would rest his hand on her growing belly and talk to their unborn child. He began working even harder on the new house, determined to have it finished before the baby came. Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1877, arriving after a long night of labor that left Beatrice exhausted but elated. Ethan had ridden through a snowstorm to fetch the midwife from town, and he held Beatrice's hand throughout the birth, his face pale but his grip steady and sure. "A boy," the midwife announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A big, healthy boy." They named him James after Beatrice's father, and from the moment Ethan held his son for the first time, he was utterly devoted. The fierce mountain man who had lived alone for so many years became the gentlest of fathers, cradling the baby with careful hands and singing old songs his own father had taught him. Life settled into a new rhythm after James was born. Beatrice learned to balance the demands of caring for an infant with maintaining her home and helping with the property. Ethan limited his time in the mountains even further, unwilling to be away from his growing family for more than a few days at a time. The new house was completed that summer, a sturdy structure with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a parlor large enough for entertaining the neighbors who had begun to settle in the area. As Park City continued to grow, they prospered over the following years. Ethan's trapping brought in steady income, supplemented by the sale of crops from their expanding farmland and livestock from their growing herds. They bought more land whenever it became available, gradually building an estate that would have seemed impossible when Beatrice first arrived in Utah Territory with nothing but a horse and a stubborn dream. 2 more children followed James. A daughter named Margaret was born in 1879, with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes. Another son, Samuel, arrived in 1881, completing their family. The house that had seemed so large when they built it now rang with the sounds of children's laughter and running feet. Beatrice watched Ethan with their children and marveled at the transformation in him. The solitary mountain man who had once insisted he needed no one had become the center of a boisterous family, and he seemed to revel in every moment of it. He taught James to track and hunt, patient with the boy's early failures and generous with praise for his successes. He was gentle with Margaret, letting her climb on his broad shoulders and telling her stories about the mountains. Even baby Samuel seemed to calm at the sound of his father's deep voice. "You ever miss it?" Beatrice asked him one evening as they sat on the porch of their fine house, watching the children play in the yard. "The solitude, the mountains, the life you had before." Ethan considered the question seriously, as he always did when she asked him something important. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," he admitted. "Life was easier in some ways when I only had to worry about myself, but I would not trade what we have for anything. This life, with you and the children, it is more than I ever dreamed was possible. Even though it means being tied to one place, even though it means responsibilities and obligations, especially because of those things," Ethan said, reaching over to take her hand. "I thought I wanted freedom, but what I really wanted was purpose. You gave me that, Beatrice. You and our children. This family is my purpose now." Beatrice squeezed his hand, her heart full. They had both come so far from the people they had been that night when a drifter tried to steal her horse. She had been a frightened girl alone, trying to build something from nothing. He had been a man convinced that isolation was safety. Together, they had become something neither of them could have been alone. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters when the livestock suffered and money grew tight. There were years of drought that tested their perseverance and made them grateful for every drop of rain. There were illnesses that swept through Park City, keeping them up nights worrying over feverish children. But there were also years of abundance, harvests so bountiful they could hardly believe their good fortune, moments of joy so pure they seemed almost painful in their intensity. James grew into a strong, capable young man, learning both his father's mountain skills and his mother's business sense. Margaret proved to have a gift for working with animals, particularly horses, and took over the management of their growing stable. Samuel, the baby, surprised them all by showing an aptitude for numbers and a desire for education that led them to send him to school in Salt Lake City when he was old enough. Through it all, Ethan and Beatrice remained the foundation of their family, their love for each other deepening with each passing year. They had the kind of partnership that comes from facing life's difficulties side by side, from building something lasting together through hard work and dedication. Ethan never returned to living in the mountains full time, though he still took trapping expeditions during the winter months, often bringing James with him to pass on the skills his own father had taught him. But he always came home, drawn by the warmth of the family he had helped create and the woman who had changed his entire world. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Beatrice up into the high country for the first time. They left the children in Margaret's capable care and spent 3 days in the mountains, camping under the stars the way Ethan had done for so many years. He showed her the places he had loved, the hidden valleys and crystal streams, the peaks that touched the sky. "This is beautiful," Beatrice said, looking out over a vista of mountains stretching away in every direction. "I understand now why you loved it so much." "It is beautiful," Ethan agreed, "but it is empty without someone to share it with. I know that now. All those years I spent up here alone, I was only half alive. You made me whole, Beatrice." She turned to him, this man who had been her protector, her partner, her love for 2 decades. His hair was streaked with silver now, and there were deeper lines around his eyes, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "You saved me that night," she said, "when the drifter tried to steal copper, but you did more than that. You saved me from a life of loneliness. You gave me a family, a home, a future I never could have built alone." "We saved each other," Ethan said, pulling her into his arms. "That is what people who love each other do." They stood there together as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. Behind them, the fire crackled cheerfully, and before them the world stretched out in all its wild beauty. But they were barely aware of it, focused only on each other, on the love that had grown from a chance meeting on a dark night 20 years before. When they returned home, it was to find their family flourishing in ways they could hardly have imagined. James, now 23, had married a girl from town, a practical young woman named Sarah who fit seamlessly into their family. Margaret was courting a rancher's son from the next valley over, and their wedding was planned for the following spring. Even Samuel, home from school for the summer, had news of his own. He had been offered a position with a banking firm in Salt Lake City, a respectable career that would have seemed impossible for the son of a mountain man and a Missouri farm girl just a generation ago. "Look at what we have built," Beatrice said to Ethan one evening as they watched their 3 children and James's wife laughing around the dinner table. "Look at the legacy we are leaving." "It is a good legacy," Ethan agreed. "Not just the land or the money, but the family. That is what matters most." The years continued their steady march forward. James and Sarah gave them grandchildren, 3 boys and 2 girls who filled the house with noise and energy. Margaret married her rancher and moved to his family's spread, though she visited often, always bringing her own growing brood with her. Samuel became successful in Salt Lake City, but never forgot his roots, returning to Park City every summer with stories of the wider world. Ethan and Beatrice grew old together, their hair turning silver, their movements slowing, but their love remaining as strong as ever. They would sit together on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the mountains, content in the knowledge that they had lived full lives and left the world better than they found it. "You remember that night?" Beatrice asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. "When we first met, every detail," Ethan said. "You standing there in your nightgown with that rifle, looking fierce and terrified at the same time. I thought you were the bravest woman I had ever seen." "I was just desperate," Beatrice said. "Desperate not to lose the only thing I had left." "You were brave," Ethan insisted. "And you still are. You have been brave every day of your life, Beatrice Nash Foster." She leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable with the weight of years between them. "We have had a good life, have we not? The best life," Ethan said, kissing the top of her head. "Better than anything I ever dreamed was possible." They lived to see their grandchildren grow, to hold great-grandchildren in their arms, to witness the transformation of Park City from a rough mining town to a proper city. The land they had worked so hard to build remained in the family, passed down to their children and grandchildren, a lasting testament to what two people could accomplish when they worked together toward a common goal. When Ethan died at the age of 78, peacefully in his sleep after a long day working on the ranch he had never truly retired from, Beatrice mourned deeply, but without regret. They had had almost 50 years together, 50 years of love and partnership that many people never experienced. She buried him on a hill overlooking their property, where he could see the mountains he had loved and the valley he had made his home. Beatrice lived another 5 years after Ethan's death, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She spent her final years telling stories about the early days, about coming west with nothing but a horse and a dream, about the night a drifter tried to steal that horse, and a mountain man came out of the darkness to help her. She told about falling in love, about building a life together, about the joy and sorrow and simple everyday moments that had made up their 50 years of marriage. When she died at 81, also peacefully in her sleep, they buried her next to Ethan on the hill overlooking the land they had built together. Their children erected a simple stone marker that read, "Ethan Foster and Beatrice Nash Foster." Together they built a legacy of love, and it was true. Their legacy lived on in the children and grandchildren who still worked the land, in the stories that were passed down through generations, in the example they had set of what love and partnership and hard work could accomplish. They had started with almost nothing, just a chance meeting on a dark night and a willingness to take a risk on something neither of them had expected. From that beginning, they had built an empire, not of wealth or power, but of family and love and lasting commitment. The house they had built still stood decades later, occupied by their descendants who maintained it with pride. The land they had accumulated remained largely intact, parceled out among children and grandchildren, but kept in the family as Ethan and Beatrice would have wanted. The lessons they had taught about hard work, integrity, and the importance of family were passed down through the generations, shaping the lives of people they would never meet, but who nevertheless bore their influence. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting over the Wasatch Mountains and the valley lay peaceful and still, those who lived in the old Foster house swore they could feel the presence of their ancestors. Not in a frightening way, but in the sense of being watched over, protected by two people who had loved this land and each other with everything they had. The story of Ethan and Beatrice became something of a legend in Park City, told and retold until it took on almost mythical proportions. But at its heart, it remained a simple story. A story about a woman alone who refused to give up, about a man who thought he needed no one, learning that connection and love were not weaknesses, but the greatest strengths a person could have. It was a story about finding home in another person, about building something lasting through dedication and partnership. It was, in the end, a story about love. Not the easy, effortless kind that exists in fairy tales, but the real, hard-won kind that comes from choosing someone every day, from working together through difficulty, and celebrating together in triumph, from building a life one day at a time until those days add up to a lifetime. The kind of love that does not just happen, but that two people create together through patience and understanding and unwavering commitment. That was the legacy Ethan Foster and Beatrice Nash Foster left behind. Not just land or money or descendants, though they left all of those things. But more importantly, they left an example of what love could be when two people were brave enough to take a chance on each other, to believe that together they could build something neither could achieve alone. And in the end, that was enough. That was everything.